Okay, this is Adam Seaman with Positive Leadership, and today I'm going to talk you through an updated version of the progression theory model. Basically, this is an updated description of the foundation for all of our work here at Positive Leadership. This is for anyone interested in learning about progression theory. Mainly, it's going to be for people who've maybe happened upon our articles, or it's for students who have worked with me or clients over the past 30 years of doing this work. And basically, progression theory is my general description for what I'm about to share with you. And then by the end, we're going to drill down into a topic that kind of started me wanting to make this video, which is good methods versus bad methods. Basically, anything you're trying to do in life, if you think about everything you did this week, where you put your time, where you put your money, where you put your calories, your effort, where you put your attention and the things you thought about. Basically, these were all methods. That's my term for anything we do to spend our resources to try to get the results we want in life. That's at the base, the substrata of what we're talking about here. I'm an organizational development consultant, so this definitely applies to organizations. How are they applying their resources to attain the outcomes they want? And I'm extremely interested in this applying to individuals as well. So, progression theory is what I would call a happy discovery. It's not an invention. I'm not trying to say, here's this concept that I put together and I'm presenting to you. It's more like over the years of doing this work in a lot of different contexts, whether it's with this 20-year program I do called the Youth Philanthropy Initiative that's coming to a close, where I would teach these concepts to high school students to help them apply it to improving the community around them while they themselves grow and develop. But I also did this as a college professor and where I taught organizational leadership and philanthropy. And the name of the high school program is called the Youth Philanthropy Initiative. So for me, you'll see that word leadership, organizations, and philanthropy. Really, what you'll see is me talk about this configuration a lot, or this is in the backdrop, is self leadership and philanthropy. What I'm going to talk about will apply to the individual level, or what I would call the self. And what we're trying to do at the individual level is build a strong foundation of who am I? What are my strengths? Where am I going in life? How do I want to use this life and all the resources that come with it for myself to have a good life, or what we would say to thrive is a very important word. I know it gets used a lot. We use it very specifically. A lot of our words we use very specifically here. Leadership is when I'm not just interested in my own thriving, but the thriving of my community, and that could be defined in different ways. My family, my employer, my department within my employer. It could be my school, my neighborhood. So leadership is at the we level. Self would be more at the me level, and then beyond that, and I don't think people would really question that connection. In fact, I think they would really intuitively get the sense that the stronger the foundation of self, then the better one is able to perform the activity of leadership, which is really important and why I emphasized it. We see leadership not as a position, that's authority. We see leadership as an activity. And we see building a self foundation as an activity. And then when we apply these concepts to helping not just myself or my community, but the whole of humanity or the larger society, that's what we mean by philanthropy. I know the term philanthropy often conjures image of rich industrialists, having so much money that then they turn it to the public, and sometimes for good and sometimes for helping to preserve their name or whitewash the way they've acquired all the money. But for me, a real philanthropy means a love of humanity, and it's taking actions that help elevate others. So that's at the background of progression theory. Now, as we go further into this, yeah, it's not just about organizational life, it's about individual life and about then the larger society. And like I said, I didn't create it. I sort of uncovered it and organized it. And so what I mean by organized it is there is a structure to it. And that's what this video is basically going to be doing. I'm going to be explaining the background structure, the way to think about progression theory, but really the way to think about life and the way to think about organizations and society. And so in that sense, this is a meta theory. This is a theory that applies to a great many things. Um, Everything that we can experience as humans. And I know that's a bold statement, but we'll come back to that perhaps. So this is a complete architecture. There's more to it than what I'm even going to be able to show you today. It's a set of terms. So I will be using a lot of words that you will have meanings for. And what I'm going to ask, and it's very difficult and it's a big ask, is that you maybe hold off on how you think of the word and maybe listen to how we're defining it and try it on, see what you think as a definition, which, by the way, everything I talk about is subject to the rule of accept, adapt, or reject, meaning anything I say, I want to be freed up to say it, and then I want you to be freed up to just ignore it or borrow what works for you or embrace the entirety if you think this makes sense. Which is another thing I'd ask is that you follow the logic here. That's something for me that is a requirement. If this doesn't follow a clear logic, then it's broken. So I'm going to try as much as possible to be transparent about the logic. It's just sometimes I think that gets a little tedious for people. And so feel free, I'm going to use this too. Feel free to stop the video at any point, take a break, because I'm going to be doing that too to see if my slides are in the right place or the concepts are the way I mean it, or just to collect my thoughts. All right. So progression theory is also a thinking tool. It's a tool for helping make sense of your world and mapping out where you want to go, the challenges you're facing, and how to convert those challenges actually into forward momentum. That's absolutely what this is about. That's not a sales pitch. That is what this is for. What I just described is making progress. So it's progression theory. It is a tool for making progress from where you are to where you would like to be. And then it's also not just a thinking tool, it is a teaming tool, meaning a lot of what we need to do to get to where we want to go involves working with others. In fact, that's the foundation, I think, of our entire species. Really short, and then we can go into this for another day. But in my worldview, it's just really important to say this. In my worldview, the most important aspect of being human, of our species, is our ability to organize. And a lot of people will point to other things that are the essential characteristic, and they're great candidates. I mean, there's a case for all of them. The use of language, the increased brain size, our upright posture, our opposable thumbs, our ability to outdistance any other land animal, pretty much. We can't outrun them, but we can outdistance them, and so we became the hunters. And so all of these things I just described, the language, the upright posture, the thinking, and the ability to hunt together, and all of this, I believe are ways to support the fundamental thing that makes us unique, and that's our ability to organize. And that's the story of humanity. So for me, when I say I study organizational development, it's from that lens, an anthropological lens almost, as opposed to a consultant, let's try to make a profit lens. It's really, what is an organization? What makes it healthy? What makes it effective? What are the principles that we know through study and through research? And then how do we capture those and apply them? That's what we do. That's what organizational development to me is really about. All right. But so this is a thinking tool, a teaming tool, and ultimately it is a thriving tool. This is a key term, as I mentioned. We'll get to it. All right. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is describe some of the key concepts. And one of the first things I want to do is describe something that is like at the very base of everything, what I would call the BIBNO. BIBNO is an acronym. I'll go ahead and get that out of the way. It's part of our language set, so I'll introduce it. Bibno is it stands for basic but not obvious. So it's I just pronounce it Bibno. Basic, meaning everything I talk about is going to be basic. You're going to understand it. You're not going to go, whoa, that's so complicated. I don't get it. You're almost maybe going to be like, oh, that's the duh, you know. But I am about going to the substrata. So it's very important to this philosophy because what I'm looking for are the right principles. And then from principles, we add on the right techniques for applying those principles. But most of the people in the organizational development space, they really focus on the techniques, you know, and I'm about the principles, not the techniques. I think I might have said methods, but I meant there's principles and then there's technique. And so principles are at that basic level. We have to go there. Otherwise, we don't know that we have that that the principles are universal. All right, so that's basic, but they're just not obvious. So I'm going to be pointing out some things that you'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, that's more what Bibno's about. Bibno's more about like, oh yeah, and I want you to do that. I want you to check the logic along the way. So that's what Bibno is, and that's kind of foundational. One of the foundational things to what we do. What I want to do though is first talk about the ultimate Bibno, which is the idea, what I call the law of continuation. Okay, and when I say something is a law, and when people say that, it's kind of a big word. Like it means it's in the sciences or in academic things. When you say something is a law, you're saying it's universal and always applicable. So if somebody says like there's a book called The Laws of Leadership, well that's a misuse of the word law because there really aren't laws of leadership. Maybe there's principles or there's concepts, but they're not universal. And there's very few things in the social sciences, for example, things related to humans and how we behave that are lawful or laws. There's tendencies, there's maybe rules, which are most of the time they're that you'll see them, but not always. And so when we say something is a law, that means it always applies. And that's what I'm about to show you here. Something that I think is a law, the law of continuation. And what that means is everything that exists, everything here, everything over there by you, everything in your world came from what preceded it. Everything that exists came from what preceded it, right? Like that's basic. It makes sense. It's Bibno, right? And then everything that preceded it came from what preceded that, okay? And you could just keep going back like that. Everything that exists comes from what some philosophers might use the term a causal nexus, this massive set of variables, meaning the moment before, that were required to come together so that the next moment happened just the way it could have happened. And so everything is that way. Our being here now is a continuation. We call it ancestry, right? That is a continuation, a lineage of DNA being passed along the time via lifespans of humans. It's profound when you get to it. Like it is as profound as what I'm saying. It pulls back everything that, you know, reduces it, that everything that exists is because of what existed before it. And then there's just a lot to deal with that. Like, how far back do you go? And ultimately, I guess logic would say you go back to an origin point, but it's so far removed from our experience now through such a long trail of continuation that we don't know. We have theories, we have ideas, we have Big Bang, we have God, we have all of these things, but nobody actually knows. Nobody knows where this continuation began or what its source is. But we do know we're in the middle of it. And that's what progression theory deals with. It doesn't concern itself. Like, I'm not here to say what the origin is, you know. You're free to interpret and believe. I'm free, and that's what it should be. The concern with progression theory is what's going on here and now within this lifespan. What do I do as a human? And what do we do as fellow humans to navigate this this continuation, which then, okay, if that's everything before the now, the continuation led up to the now, then why wouldn't we think that it stands to reason that this moment will be leading to the next moments, and that everything in our future will be a series of continuations? And so this is just I don't know where this comes from or why it is the way it is. All I know is that, everything that exists, it can be explained by this idea of continuation, that it came from the set of things that existed right before it. And if you changed any of those elements before it, what exists would also change. So that's the law of continuation. I'm just putting it out there because it's in the backdrop of everything we're going to talk about. And in fact, because this is called progression theory, right? This is when humans deliberately harness this law of continuation, then I call that progression theory. Progression theory is realizing, wow, that thing called continuation was always happening and it always will happen. And so if I want to move toward a condition or a state that I want, then I could use continuation almost like an escalator or a ladder or a way to make progress, continually toward the goal. Almost like, I don't use a lot of sports metaphors, but golf, which I've never golfed in my life, but that is golf. You want to get to a goal, a hole, and maybe you'll get it in one shot or stroke, but it's probably going to take you many, and getting closer and closer. And so golf is a game of progression, perhaps, and life is all about progression. So that's the setup here. The law of continuation. Now, I talked to you about Bibno already. So what I want to talk to you about next is this idea of survival and thriving, because this is at the heart of it. When we talk about continuation, what are our major concerns? Well, the first major concern is survival. Well, let me just back up a little bit and show you this model. I call it the BEST model, but not because it's the best model, just because it's the acronym. The B in BEST is the beginning or the birth. Everything that exists now has a beginning, has an origin. We may not know that precise moment that this computer became a computer. Is it when I put this in there or put that in there, or was it when I loaded the software, or was it when I plugged it in, or was it when I registered it? We can debate that, but we can't debate that that computer did have a beginning. All right. Now, the E in BEST is the ending. Everything has an ending. Everything that begins ends. And that's true for a life. That is true for a relationship. That is true for a planet, even, or you could think of a star. I mean, the time scale is extremely long, but it's just true of everything in this physical world has a beginning and an ending. And again, this is where I ask you to test the logic as I'm talking through it. And so then the S and the T in BEST is basically my description of two main states of anything that is in existence. Anything that's after birth but before ending or death it has two main states. It could be in a state of survival, or it could be in a state of thriving. But if it falls below a state of survival, then that by definition is, an ending or a death, right? So, but then we don't just want to survive. We want it to be better than surviving. And so I think it's important to realize that there are like degrees of survival. It's not just one level. There's, most everything in progression theory recognizes there's a scale or a spectrum. Okay. And this would be an example of that. So survival isn't just one thing. There's different levels, and same with thriving. And what I like to think about is that, you may not have reached your highest level of thriving yet, or also that thriving is very situational. Maybe the situation's dire, and so thriving isn't what we would normally think of it. But given the dire situation, what would thriving look like? Maybe for somebody that was in their end of life and they were in hospice care. I mean, I know it'd be weird to think of thriving in that stage, but what would thriving look like would be a great challenge to think of, and a great way to think about it. so that we can optimize the experience, even under dire conditions or conditions of natural endings, which we just have to embrace. And progression theory does it respects that, and it tries to bring it to the forefront even, and so we can harness it. So thriving is the goal, but we can't stay at thriving. There's many things that come our way from outside of our control that could interrupt our thriving and even threaten our survival. And so that's accounted for in progression theory. It's the idea that thriving isn't a steady state. It's a constant thing that we need to balance and consider as we move through time. And that's why I also have this diagram in here. It's something I borrowed from from a website called Wait But Why, which I highly recommend. Wait But Why. And I just reoriented. They're famous for this image of like putting a human lifespan into weeks. And I just formatted it a little differently. That's all I did here. But I just want to give credit to Wait But Why. Okay. So basically the idea is there's 52 weeks in a year, right? And that the human lifespan could range, there's people living beyond 100 years. So the idea is, where are you in this time frame? But you can look at anything that has a beginning and that it ultimately has an ending. And then you can't really show here, it's, the survival and thriving. But if you were to really zoom in on each one of these weeks, overall, if this was your current week, on a scale, I can't make it big enough, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being thriving, then how would you rate this week, on that spectrum of 0 to 10? Or I have another tool I'll show you, where I put it on a scale like this of 0 to 100. But 0 to 10, how much was this week about thriving versus surviving? And how do we move from surviving to thriving? And that's the concern of progression theory. All right. So the three main concepts of progression theory are captured here, and in this relationship, that it is about engaging our resources to align the factors that are necessary for us to thrive. I'll come back to that. So you see that engagement is at the base, and what we do is we engage our resources to get our factors, what I call factors necessary, into alignment. And what makes them the factors necessary is they're necessary in order for thriving to result. So that would be maybe the order of how it works, but I explain it in absolute reverse. Okay. So I'm going to start with what thriving is when I talk about this. What I like to do a lot is go to word origins, like where did a word begin? And because I believe that they're sort of codes from past humans, passed to us, meant to convey how to navigate the world. That's what language does. It helps us navigate the world. So what is thriving? Thriving is the definition would be to grow or develop well, or grow or develop vigorously. So there's growth, there's development. To the point of what? To the point of prosperity, being prosperous, or another word for it is a point of flourishing, the French word for flower. So to fully flourish. Now, I would also add to this mix a phrase that I've come to really embrace, which is thriving is also can be defined as making meaningful progress. And I believe progress is a human need. I think that the times when you might be most frustrated or experiencing difficulty is when you are not able to make progress. Progress on what? On your values, things that are important to you, on your goals, things you're trying to accomplish, on your strengths, the things you're good at, and being able to act on them. So thriving is really what we're trying to get to. We're trying to progress toward a state of thriving. Yes, that's why it's called progression theory. All right. Now, What I'd like to do then is go into the origin of the term, the etymology of it, where this word thrive comes from the Norse tradition, which is a little unusual. Most of our words come from um, uh, Latin or Old English or French. But here we have a Norse word making it into our lexicon, and quite powerfully lately you see thrive everywhere. Everybody's talking about thriving. What I want to say is progression theory is actually the practice of thriving, not just talking about it or vague descriptions, but the practice of it when we get into it, which eventually I know we will. All right. So thriving, originally it was to grasp or to get a hold of. It's something you do with your hands, and it's something forceful. It's you acting on your environment. And that's how it made its migration to growing or increasing, because what you're doing when you're thriving then is you are seizing for yourself. You're thrifying, I guess. I don't know how they would say it. Thrifa or thrifask, but now it's what we say thriving. It sounds a little less aggressive, but that's the origin of this word. And I think it's really important because I want to distinguish it from happiness, because we use that a lot. And I've studied happiness or positive psychology a lot. And when you look at the word happy, you can see that the first three words are also the same in happen or happenstance or even haphazard, right? And so when you see that, it tells you that hap conveys a certain amount of luck. And I'm not opposed to luck. It's just I can't really build a model around it. I can't factor it in. It's the wild card. So I like happiness and I want happiness. And what it means is that, if this is you, with your disjointed back, all right, but you're in the world is going to bring you things that you want, It's also going to bring you things you don't want, but that's not going to make you happy. That's going to make you other things, sad or angry or whatever. But when the world brings you something you do want, well, then you should feel happy. And so I love happiness. I'm a big fan of it. And I want as much as I could have, but I can't really, get a handle on it the way I can with thriving or seizing for oneself. So now in progression theory, we have a lot to say about what is thriving. Ultimately, what I think of it as the universal outcome. I think of it as what we all want, regardless of our background. Like you over there, me over here, could be totally different people. But when I know what you care about and what I care about, we want the same thing. We want those things we care about to thrive. So thriving is the universal outcome. We just need to define, what is our focus? What are we talking about? And why does it matter? Focus plus why it matters. And when we have a focus and we know why it matters, then we're able to extrapolate. Well, what do I want for it? What would it mean to grow for my focus? What would it mean to develop well or even vigorously for my bank account, for my family, for my health, for my business, whatever it is, whatever my focus is. And I know I wrote it pretty blurry, which I think is ironic. Whatever our focus is, um, what would meaningful progress look like? And that's what progression theory does, is it helps us really think about what matters and where to place our resources or our methods, which we'll get to. But this takes a little bit to understand the way of thinking, but I hope that you're with me so far on what we mean by thriving and its importance. Okay, so let's just clean all that up for now. So we want thriving. That's the state that we want. Now, how do we get there? Well, that's the second principle of progression theory. The first principle would be thriving. The second principle of progression theory is the principle of alignment. And what it's saying is if I want to go from where I'm at to where I want to be, I want to make progress to my thriving, to my universal outcome. I'll just call it my universal outcome, right? And this is my starting point. This is where I'm at. Then what are the things that are most essential for having those outcomes that I want, to achieving that state of growth, of success, of well-being, of meaningful progress? What would that take for the things I care about? Well, if we can identify them, and we've developed a set of tools and processes, for one, identifying what is our focus and what do we want for that focus. And then we've developed a set of tools for then identifying the factors that are necessary. What we want to do is get to a collection of the key factors. And it's really hard to do. You often don't know till after the fact if they're the right factors. After the fact knowing is what we call experience. So past experience can help know the factors. But sometimes it's a matter of pioneering. Maybe it's a problem no one's solved yet. Or if it is a problem that's solved, then we really want to know. We want to benchmark. We want to engage the best practices. So what we're looking for are what I call the factors necessary. And I know it's maybe a weird way to say it because you might go, why don't you just call it necessary factors? And I don't know why. Because what I say is that I think my reason is for saying that we're looking for the factors necessary for thriving. I don't really say the necessary factors. Yeah, I don't know why I do it, but they're called factors necessary. And so we have a set of tools that we use to identify them. And then what do we do with them? Once we identify our factors that are necessary for thriving, then what we need to do is we need to make sure that all of our resources go into these factors in the right way. And they don't go anywhere else, okay, until they go into the factors necessary. Don't put your resources into the factors optional or the factors irrelevant. Put them into the factors necessary for thriving. And I know that sounds basic, but it's not obvious apparently to a lot of people, because they don't think about it that way. They don't stop to say, wait, let's define thriving. All right, let's make sure we all agree. Is this what thriving is? Okay, yeah. And then, all right, now do we know what those factors necessary are? Have we clarified that? Are we sure? How do we know? You're telling us to do this? How do we know we're supposed to be doing this? You want us to go and do this work over here? Why do this work over here? Or what's this change you're doing? Why are you making this change? Have you identified the factors necessary for thriving, assuming you've defined it? All right, so now what we want to do is make sure our resources go there, and that's what engagement means. Now, I know that a lot of times we use the word engagement to talk about like employee engagement or student engagement or audience engagement. And what we mean by that is we need to get people's attention. And yes, I agree with that. That works. Attention works here, but there's other things that we want to engage. And I think, again, it goes back to understanding what does the word engage mean? And if I were to pull up the etymology of it, the word engage really means to spend or to pledge. Let's see if I can find a clean space for this. Yeah, so it's about like wages or to wed, which means to make a pledge, and that pledge or that giving your word to engage, that engagement means I'm going to give my resources. So that's the way we really mean it. Where attention is most definitely a resource, a very important one. So we use the word to mean more than just that. What we want to engage in general are resources. And resources could be many things. It could be attention, it could be money or time or technology or reputation, your network or experience or talent or team, if you think about it. Like if you have a group of people and they're working together at 50% capacity, but you were able to get them working even better, like 75, so a 25% increase in their capacity to work together, that's a resource that you're now engaging. And what you want to do is take all these resources and you don't want to spend them off over here or all these other places. You want them to go into the factors that are necessary. So, um, that's an overview of our three principles. Okay, so I wanted to get a slide ready to show the next thing, maybe a way to talk through these concepts a little more concretely. I've created a worksheet. It's remarkably simple, but it's taken me about 25 years to make. So it's a way to apply what we just talked about. And I'll even show you some examples once we lay it out there. So it's numbered. So it's just go by the numbers, one, two, three, four. All right. So step one is select a focus and state why it matters. And we could use a couple of examples here. In this case, I was talking with some of my high school students, and they were talking about their focus being how to have a great junior year characterized by fun, friendship, and success. Now, they didn't just come out with that statement. We had to talk through it, and I interviewed them a little bit. What are you interested in? What matters to you? And this is what came out. And then I would say, okay, well, then if that's your focus, so that's part A, then part B would be, why does it matter? Because it's going to make things less stressful. Overall, it's going to be a better experience. And usually there's more than just one reason why something matters. Of course, it could just be one reason, but I think it's important to look at the different reasons why it matters. Now, when we have a focus and we know why it matters, then what that gives us is a purpose. That's kind of something I discovered along the way, is that I think people find the term purpose to be overwhelming. If you say, what's your purpose? People are going to be like, I don't know, maybe a little panic stricken because it's a big question. It's an important question. I don't know. I don't want to get that one wrong. But if you just say, okay, well, what are you focused on? What's a time for now? Where's your attention? What matters comes second, but like you could say what matters, and then it's this, and then why does it matter? That's what a focus is. It's what matters and then why. So you can even do this with children, young children. You could say, "Oh, well, what are you doing? What do you focus on? What's on your mind? What are you interested in?" This. Oh, okay. Well, then why does it matter? And then it might be fun to hear their reasons why it matters to them. I mean, what a great way to get to know somebody is why are they doing what matters to them, right? I mean, what's more essential to a person? So these questions, and it has to be separate. You can't go, well, what's your focus and why does it matter? You have to go, all right, one, what's the focus? And then don't move on from there until you agree. And especially if there's other people in the room and why are we having this meeting? Well, it's for this. Are we sure? Is that the focus? Let's make sure we're aligned on that. And then you ask why it matters. It's a part A and then part B. So here we have our purpose, which is very essential for thriving. Okay. Now, once we know our purpose, our why, now what we have is a way to say, well, what are the outcomes? What would growth look like? Or not just growth, what would success look like? Or what would well-being look like for our focus? For our junior year, what would growth look like in our junior year? What would success look like in our junior year? What would well-being look like? And then the one I like, it's not on here. What would meaningful progress look like? What would it look like if you made meaningful progress in your junior year? And what you want to do when you answer the question is you don't want to just say one thing. You want to populate it. That's the word I use. You want to populate your answer or this box with with details, big picture, little picture, qualities, quantities, things you can describe and things you can measure, whatever you would say would define success for your focus, or in this case, your junior year, right? Now, another example comes from I just had this on here in my slides, so I don't remember the exact conversation, but this was with a corporate client, a coaching client in the I'm going to guess an engineering field. Um, what? Oh no, this is for a hospital. Yeah, this is in healthcare. What is your focus? It's alignment of our coding department. We have a department that does our coding and our billing, and it's very important to the functioning. So why does it matter? Well, it's the start of the revenue cycle, so it's vital for our financial health. We need to minimize any unnecessary stress and burnout so we don't lose our employees and we don't make mistakes, which is the next one. Coding errors can lead to denials, meaning the insurance company won't pay for it, or it will lead to delays in getting care or getting the payment. Um, and we want to maximize our efficiency. It matters because, if it takes too long, we're not going to have enough resources to be successful. So you can see that's how they defined. I should have zoomed in on it a little bit. That's how they said what is their focus, and that's here the focus, and then the bullet points underneath are all the reasons why it matters. That's what all these are. These bullet points here are why it matters. So now we have our purpose. That's our origin. That's where this whole thing begins. Progression begins with having a focus, and then it gets to the thriving, which is what is growth, success, well-being, meaningful progress look like for our focus? Because that's what we want. We want the thriving. We don't want just survival. We're not asking what survival is, although we have to care about survival. If that's not being addressed, then we shouldn't be in a thriving conversation. I guess I'm making an assumption here. Maybe we need to make sure we're in a thriving conversation and not a survival conversation, because that is the truth. We shouldn't be talking about thriving if we're not yet even surviving. I mean, a lot of times that's such a foolish mistake that people make. They're spending money on things that aren't necessary for their essential living, but it'll help them feel good or entertain or distract or whatever. And so then they're using their resources in ways that don't reflect, don't lead. They're not focused on the factors necessary, which is where we're going. Okay. So once we know this relationship between our purpose and our outcomes, and that's what thriving is. Thriving is a relationship between one's purpose and outcomes. If your outcomes are in the opposite direction of your purpose, you're not thriving. If your outcomes are in the opposite direction over here, you're actually suffering. And so that's really a good time for me to introduce something we call the alignment meter. This is a fundamental tool of progression theory. Now, remember, we just finished talking about thriving. What is thriving? It's a relationship between what is my purpose, what am I focused on, and why does it matter? And then getting outcomes that reflect that purpose, and avoiding the outcomes, not getting outcomes that are in the opposite direction. We're not wanting that. And here's a way to show it, is what we call the alignment meter. And I could put your purpose right here at the center. And I could say what we want to do is, from our purpose, we want to get to these outcomes that we call thriving. What progress would look like, what is success, what does growth look like? That's thriving. And what we don't want is, we don't want things in the opposite direction, because that's suffering. And this is important. The alignment meter shows you that anything you experience in the world, really, an object, a person, an event, an idea, it'll have a score for you. It might not be the same for everybody else, but everything you experience will be somewhere on the scale of 0 to 100. And so what we want to do is we want to be as much as possible on the side of alignment, because alignment is a state in which all the related elements, or all the factors necessary, they're functioning optimally. and the outcomes are moving toward thriving. That's what alignment looks like. You know alignment in your life. You know when things align with you. You know when relationships are aligned or products are aligned, and you know when they contrast. And that word contrast, there's that word contra in there, which means against. So there's things that are against what you want. They're not aligned. And so that's the scale here is you want to go from contrast to alignment. In your personal life, for the self, you want to go from contrast for alignment with your community, your organization. So people who can do that, who could go from contrast to alignment and move in that direction, that's what we define as leadership. And then if you could do it for other people or humanity as a whole, then going from contrast to alignment is philanthropy. So if we have homelessness or illiteracy or things like that, we know that's not good for humanity. So we want to take those things that are against humanity and we want to make progress in the right direction. How? By focusing on the factors necessary. And a lot of times, if we're focusing on these issues, we're putting resources into things that aren't the right way to do it. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of bad ideas maybe out there, or, and we need to experiment. We need to try things. So there's that. But I think every community is redoing the experiment on these issues of literacy, homelessness, or houselessness, or however we want to say it, the unhoused population, or any of the challenges facing society. What we're trying to do is go from contrast to alignment. That's what philanthropy is at the society level, and leadership is doing it at the organizational level. And then self-development, self-realization, self-actualization. You can use any of these words. These are about going from contrast to alignment in your own life. Actualization. It's a long word. All right. So, and I'm writing with the mouse if you're wondering why. It's so sloppy. So we want to go from self to leadership to philanthropy. And what we're trying to do is thrive in all three of these areas. And the way we do it is the same. We want to go from where we're at, which isn't always contrast. I mean, you might start at alignment and you might want to go get more aligned, or you might be here already and you want to maintain. So that's on a situational basis. But the alignment meter is sort of a guide for are you suffering, which means when you're suffering, the demands placed on you exceed the resources available. And that's a very important thing. If you're physically way overwhelmed with demand, physical demand, heavy weights, for example, and it's so heavy you can't lift it, it exceeds your capacity, well, then it could crush you or it could hurt you or something like that. And you can think of other ways too. That's just physical demand. What about financial demand versus financial capacity? If your demands on you pay these bills, whether they're planned or unexpected bills, new demands, well, do you have the capacity to meet those financially? Or emotionally, there's emotional demands. There's things in life that really demand, a lot of our empathy and a lot of our, they take us on an emotional roller coaster. Maybe it exceeds our capacity to deal with it. So the world around us is full of demands, and we're about the capacity to meet them. And capacity also, another word for that could be resources. We don't want to waste them. We want to use them well. All right. So coming back to our worksheet, then I'll go back to the blank version. We want to select our focus and state why it matters. Even though I don't use the word, that's purpose. That's our definition for purpose. Then what we want to do is we want to name our outcomes that would reflect our purpose. And once we populate, or list out the outcomes that would reflect our purpose, now what we need to do is we need to brainstorm what are all the factors that could come into play that would determine whether or not we reach these outcomes. What would be the things and there's going to be a long list. I mean, you might list 20, 50, 100, but ultimately what you want to do is you want to cluster them into related groups. And usually it'll be between 4 and 6 clusters. That's what I've found. Maybe it could be as many as 6. And then even if it is 6, I'm still a little concerned it's too many. So it's almost like 5 is the sweet spot, but play with that. It is situational by situation. What we want to do is we want to list those factors that are necessary for achieving those outcomes. And then for each factor, we could think about it on a scale of, let's just say 0 to 10 or a 0 to 100. Where is it now? Oh, it's at a 3 or a 4. That looks like maybe a 3.5. Okay. But where does it need to be? It needs to be at a 7. So progression here would be going from a 3 to a 7, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Because once we know what our progression is for each of these, then here's the logic. If these are the right factors, if these, let's say we have 5 factors, and let's say we really nailed it and these are the right ones, and we make progress in the right direction, what's going to happen to our outcomes? We're going to see more of them. We're going to see our outcomes being realized. We're going to see them going from potential or what could be to actually happening. That's how everything happens in the world. That's how things go from not existing to existing. Is the factors necessary came together in the right way to lead to those outcomes. So we're just reverse engineering what outcomes are. We're just saying, what are the outcomes we want? And then let's imagine what the factors are. Now, we may not get all the factors. Let's say there's a factor over here and we never identified it. It was a mystery to us and hidden behind the veil of experience and knowledge. Nobody knew about it before, we would be able to make a certain amount of progress to our outcomes, but without this, if it's a factor necessary, we won't really be able to reach the full potential. So it's trial and error. Companies are making bets on what's the right factors necessary for us to win the cell phone wars or to win the, whatever industry we're talking about, retail or, any of it, political. What were the factors necessary to win an election? And every candidate has their theory, every campaign has their theory, and then afterwards you have to think about, well, why didn't we win? What were the factors that we missed? So this is an important activity, and it takes a lot to do. And so we have a lot of tools and approaches. When we do this for clients, we recommend doing a massive exploration of where have we been, as we call it, an impact study. And we do that because it takes a lot to do. So people will outsource that to us. Or we do a needs analysis. What are the needs? So it's really about uncovering these factors necessary. And strategic planning is meant to do this. But most of the strategic planning I see happens at a one-day retreat, and this ain't happening. I'm sorry. And so the whole thing is out of whack, because then what we do for the rest of the year outside of the strategic planning event is we're spending resources not on these things, but on the things that we've already committed to, things over here and over here, what I call motions eventually. I say we spend those on motions versus ultimately, if we get to the factors, we could drill down. At this level, it's not there yet, but we could drill down to the opposite of motions, what we call actions. And I know those words mean whatever, different things, different people. But in our language, when we do things that are tied to the factors necessary that are going to produce our outcomes that reflect our purpose, those are actions. But when we do things that I don't know why we do them, I was just told to do it, or that's the way we always did it, or I don't know, we're just throwing it at the wall to see what sticks. Well, then those are motions. And the deal is your resources have already been engaged. Are you going to engage your resources in actions or in motions? And most of the time they're involved in motions, which is why we're not turning the factors necessary, which is why we're not getting the outcomes. And that's individually or as a community or as a society. You can look at students and you can say, why is this student getting A's and this student's getting C's? Well, maybe let's also assume they're very similar in all the other respects. Maybe the difference is one student knows the factors necessary and is working on aligning them and investing their resources into it. And the other student doesn't know the factors necessary and is not putting their resources into those. The same could be said for businesses who's done a better job identifying the factors necessary and who's doing a better job at investing resources, which leads us into engagement. Because what we want to do once we know our factors necessary and once we flesh it out more, there's a lot more to do here. What we do is we take clients through the process of saying, okay, if you're at a 3 and you want to get to a 7, well, then let's chart the course to get there. And then if we do that for all of those, what they'll have is a really well-devised plan of actions, which is what we want. Okay. So, so how do we turn these gears? How do we move them from where they are, let's say to 3 or 4 to a 7? Well, what we need to do is optimize our engagement. Gauge means to pledge. What do we pledge? We pledge our resources, as we discussed, time, effort, money. I mean, there's a whole list of them. There's things I come up with all the time I don't think of as resources that are. Engagement involves the identification and cultivation and distribution. So here's what I mean. We need to first identify our resources. And what it says here is we need to confirm that the resources we think we have are actually available. So I don't want to think I have something and then get to my refrigerator, for example, and find out I don't have the food or whatever, the resources necessary to cook a meal or something. So also, it might be about resources I didn't know I have that I actually do. Like, oh, I'm out of flour, but I have a neighbor who's got all sorts of cooking things and we're in a good relationship. So I've now identified resources I didn't know I had. But which kind of gets to the next one is maybe if I don't have resources, let's say my neighbor doesn't have them either, then I can still cultivate the resource. I could look for other ways to get those resources. I could grow my resources, and that's a very important thing to realize. It's basic, but it's not always obvious. So I need to identify the resources. I need to then cultivate them further if I haven't, if the what I've identified isn't there. And then once I've cultivated the necessary resources, then distributing, that was a weird way to say it, distributing the resources or the distribution of the resources becomes really critical because I could identify and cultivate resources very well, but I could distribute them like a ding dong and send them to places that don't matter. Maybe I distribute them not to the factors necessary. I'm not putting them there. Maybe because I've never identified the factors necessary, I'm putting my resources over there or over there because of habit or because I don't know better or whatever. So really, engagement involves these three things. And again, we have tools that are about all of these, about identifying, cultivating, and distributing resources. But what the point is that it follows this very tight architecture of first, we want to know what thriving looks like. Then we want to know what engagement looks like, or I'm sorry, what thriving looks like. Then what does alignment look like? What are the factors necessary that need to be aligned, which can only be determined by knowing what thriving looks like first. And then, so first is determining what thriving looks like. Second is then knowing what factors are necessary. Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's already solved and figured out, or maybe you need to research it, or maybe it's a new kind of problem. And then three, we need to figure out what are the resources we have. Do we have enough to get things into gear? And where do we want to place our resources to make optimum impact towards the outcomes, thus making progress? Progression theory is what it's all about. Now, what I didn't talk about is progression versus perfection. And that's kind of a really big point because it goes all the way back to the beginning. And I didn't really say this about why is it progression theory? And well, first, it's a recognition that part of the human experience is that we have in our mind a state for the way things should be. And that's how I define perfectionism. I didn't used to define it that way. I always thought perfectionism is just, that person or being a person that needs to have things, well, perfect. And then you can't be happy until they're perfect. Well, what I realized is that what perfection really is what's in my head. I mean, who's to say what perfect is? And so getting rid of this ideal, or first of all, defining perfection as what's in my head for the way I think it should be, is much more realistic. It's much more how people operate. And then the recognition of, well, what are the odds that the way I have come to conceive of whatever this thing's going to be will be the way it's actually going to be? I mean, it's very slim sometimes, or it's, we find that there's so many other ways it could be. And so there's a lot of room for disappointment. Instead, what we have to realize is perfection is truly never possible. But progress is always possible. It's the opposite. There's always something we can do to make progress toward thriving, but there's basically nothing we can do to achieve perfection. So progression theory is very much focused on that. So what we're looking to do is make progress always towards thriving. And the reason perfection's not possible, or one of the reasons, is because thriving is always changing. There's always different states. So the goalposts are always changing, or the criteria is always different, or you know, it's always in moving. So we'll never be satisfied if if we keep chasing what's in our head for the way things should be. And I know for most people this might not make sense, but for the people that are interested in Eastern philosophy, I've basically described suffering, in Buddhism and kind of the attachment to things. But that's a story for another day. It's just another way of looking at that concept. All right. So, so now that we have this fleshed out, I wanna talk about you know the three things that make up every human activity, and we know two of them. Every activity has a purpose. It has a reason why you do something. It has an intended outcome. Okay. So that's purpose. And I use this bridge metaphor to describe it. POM is what I'm about to show you. It's what we call it, POM. My students call it POM. And it's because it spells out first purpose, which is our why we're doing something. And remember, it's what is our focus and why does it matter? So that's purpose. Second are the outcomes, which is what thriving looks like for our purpose, right? And then when we know what our outcomes are, when we populate them, then we ask, well, what are the factors necessary? And that begins our understanding of what are the right methods, which is the how. Purpose is why. Outcomes are the what, or to what end, might be a way to say it. Or now what I describe it as, it's the where. Where are we going? What's the destination? What's the realized version of our purpose? What does that look like? Get it out on the table. Let's explore it. Let's manage our perfectionism. Let's get clear on what progress would look like, meaningful progress. And then once we do it, then we could figure out the how. We can say, well, how are we going to do it? And our general word for that is methods. Methods are how we will spend our resources to produce the outcomes. And so it's very important, this order. You have to do purpose first, then you do outcome second. You can't know outcomes unless you know what are we talking about? What is the focus? And then methods is we don't know how to spend our resources until we know where we're going. But the problem with our society, and I think you might see this in your work groups or people around you, is people start with methods first. They don't do it third. They don't even do purpose or outcomes a lot of the time. I very rarely go to meetings where people say, here's our focus, here's why it matters. Everyone agree? All right, well, here's the outcomes we're looking for. Does that work for everybody? All right, now here's our agenda, which basically are your methods. Here's how we're going to spend our time, resource. Here's how we're going to spend our collective knowledge. Meetings are very expensive when you think about it. Here's how we're going to spend our salaries for this hour. We got 10 people in this meeting. Let's multiply each salary time, or this portion of that salary, times 10. And that's how expensive this meeting is. So it's a meeting is all these resources, and how are we going to spend it? All right. So the idea is, the main lesson of POM is learn how to do purpose first. What is our focus? Why does it matter? What are the outcomes second? What does thriving look like? Success, growth, meaningful progress. Let's get very clear. Let's get vivid. Let's make sure we all agree. And then now, what are the factors we need to focus on, that if we really get those factors into alignment, then we will be making progress toward these outcomes. We'll see them happening. So what I want to show you then, our methods has 3 layers to it. So at the highest level, I have it as squares, whereas before I was making circles. The highest level is the strategy. When we take our factors necessary, all I'm doing then is, I didn't call them strategies at first, I called them factors necessary. That's just to get us to the point of getting them in shape, getting them clarified what they are. Once we know what they are, now I just change the word now. They're strategies. That's all. That's basically how we get to strategies using our system. There's more to it than that, but essentially that's it. So usually you'll have 4 to 6 strategies. And every strategy, let's say it has a scale of 0 to 10 to completion, and we need to get this strategy to an 8. Why don't I say 10? Very rarely do we want to get something from a 10 to a 10. It's why? Because it's expensive. It's very expensive. I want you to think of it like when we go from a 0 to a 1, that's not that hard. Think about anything just to get something in basic shape. To go from a 1 to a 2, not too bad. 3, 4, but as you go into, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the more you move in this direction, kind of like turning a spring, the more you turn it, the more energy, more resource it takes to turn it. And so by the time you get something to a 10, it's a very, very heavy investment. So I don't know that I've ever recommended that something just be a 10. The highest I've ever seen or feel good about would be getting something to a 9, for example. But anyway. But the question is, once we know where we want it, 0 to 10, and let's say, we're at a 5 and we want to get it to an 8, then what we need to answer are what are the clusters of activities, what are the categories of things that we need to get going on to go from a 5 to an 8. And that's what we could call tactics. So we have strategies and tactics, which obviously these words are used a lot already, but I think a lot of people who use those words don't really know, and they can't admit that they don't know either. It's really kind of a trap, but we'll get it. That's a story for another day too. But what this does is it clarifies for everybody in the organization. What is a strategy? Okay, it's the factors necessary for getting to our outcomes. What are the outcomes? They're the realization of our purpose. All right, great. Are we all on board with that? Fantastic. Here's our strategies. Now, what we need to do is break them down into tactics. Now, how many tactics? It's very difficult to say. Maybe to get from a 5 to an 8, it's just one tactic. Maybe it's 4, as we see here. Maybe it's 12. I don't know. It just depends on the scale of what we're talking about. So tactics are like projects, if maybe strategies are big picture, big ideas or general directions for where we're going. Tactics are more like projects and things we want to, implement to get our strategy going, to execute our strategy. And then actions, and I told you this is an important word to us. Actions are the individual steps that comprise a tactic. And there could be many, many actions, or it could just be one action. Again, it varies. But this structure of strategies, tactics, and actions really allows people to dial into what we need. Now, I want to tell you too that in our work at Positive Leadership, this is also the 3 levels of every organization, or the 3 layers of every organization. And so to understand, we have a strategic layer, we have a tactical layer. Strategic is the senior management executives. Tactical layer is usually the middle management supervisors. And then the action layer is the operators, the frontline people, the people actually doing operations. So I want to say very clearly that we use the word in Positive Leadership. We use operations and actions interchangeably. They mean the same thing. So we have the operational layer. So like in a hospital, a surgeon is literally the operational layer, or the nurse or the admissions clerk, or, the nurse. Or in a school, the front line could be the teacher, the bus driver, maybe the tactical layer might be the principal, and then the superintendent might be the strategic layer, or the school board would be the strategic layer. So you can begin to see that there's a lot of more to go into that there. But what I'm trying to show you is how progression theory is a complete system. There's lots of branches to it. But for now, what we want to understand is the basic idea of purpose, outcomes, and methods. And then in order to implement our actions, to then complete our tactics, which complete our strategy, we need to make sure our resources are going here. Our human resources, our financial resources, our time resources, our capital resources. So now basically what I've just shown you is the thriving alignment engagement thing here. I showed you basically purpose and outcomes. P and O is how we know what thriving is. And then methods is here, number 3. So this is the how, and the highest level is a strategy. These are all strategies now. You didn't know that before. And those strategies will break down into tactics. And those tactics, if they're the right tactics, are going to be what turns the gear or turns that strategy in the right direction. And as we turn in the right direction, we get our outcomes. So these are tactics. And then each tactic is broken down into operations or action steps. And this is true for you in your own daily life. Everything you did today was an action, or maybe it was emotion. That's a story for another day or something to reflect on. But let's say you did something that was an action, you would say, okay, well, what tactic was that part of? Oh, well, what strategy was that part of? Like today I drove to work. That was the action I took. Oh, well, what tactic is that part of? Oh, it's called having a job. That's my tactic. Well, what strategy is that for? That's for financial well-being. Oh, financial well-being is a factor necessary for me to thrive. That makes sense. So what we're looking for is a really healthy relationship between our purpose and our outcomes, and then between our methods and our outcomes. And then finally here, this is about the resources. When we talk about engagement, it's engaging oneself and others and resources, which I am a resource, other people are resources, and all the resources we represent to do what? To align the factors that are necessary for us to thrive. Now, ultimately, one of the things I want to talk about in this video is good methods versus bad methods. Okay? What's a good method versus a bad method? And I think what I need to do is probably erase a lot of this to then show us what a good method versus a bad method is. Good methods are anything. Let me go to the STO image. It's because all of these are methods. Let me just be clear about that. All S, T, and O, or A, actions, or O, operations. These are all methods. And we break methods down into different categories. S is the highest level of a method. And then T is the mid-range, and then A or O, action or operation, is the refined version. So you could think of it like hours and minutes and seconds as a way to conceptualize it. They're all time, just like these are all methods. But starting with how we arrive at strategies is that, oh, these are the things we need in order to thrive or reach our outcomes. And that's really important. Once we have our strategies, then we need to break them up and get more detailed about it, because strategies are very vague. And that's where tactics come in. Now we got actions. So these are all methods. That's what I refer to. All three of these are methods together. So what are good methods versus bad methods? And the answer to that is that, remember, methods are how we spend resources. So a good method is one where we spend our resources in ways that A, gets our maximum amount of outcome we can out of those resources. But then it also uses as little of those resources as possible. So a good method produces maximum outcome for minimum use of resource. So maximum outcome for minimum use of resource, that's good. A bad method would be the opposite. It would use the maximum amount of resource, but it would produce the minimum amount of outcome. That's the difference between a good method and a bad method. And in order to know if a method is good or bad, we need to go through the process of picking our focus, stating why it matters, identifying what outcomes reflect growth, meaningful progress related to our purpose. And then we need to identify the factors necessary, break those down into tactics, because those are our strategies, the factors necessary. And then we break it down further into the individual action steps. And as we complete the action steps, we are producing our outcomes. And in fact, the only thing in the world that produces outcomes are actions. Motions can produce outcomes, but by accident. Like they say a stopped clock is right twice a day. Well, that's kind of the idea of emotion, whereas actions are being right every second of the day if they're the right actions. And so then your resources are being better spent. And so that's the difference between a good method and a bad method. So that's a good place to bring this video to a pause. And then we'll talk about more stuff later. That's my graceful ending.